Yep. Hello. Hi. Hello, everyone. Good morning, you bright people at 9 a.m. on a Friday. So my name is Gustavo. I'm here to talk about a war story, something that I'm currently still doing at work. So I work at a big financial company. I joined them about a year and a half ago, and I have to say that I've been really lucky. Not really lucky for the company because it's a company and a company's work at the end of the day. But there's something that I've been really lucky with, and it's that within a big organization, we're about 1,500 people in finance, which is quite big. I've landed on a team that is pretty much self-managed. The fact that we're self-managed means that we own pretty much everything except for our production machines. So we own the code, we own the builds, we own the deployment. Whenever we want to make a change, we just make a change in the code, put it into the CI environment, commit the code into Bitbucket now. It was a stash until about 2-3 weeks ago. And the Bamboo plan will actually build it for us and deploy it all over the place. So within this context, our hot potato shows up. So the first thing that I want to do is to define what is a hot potato, right? So a hot potato is a legacy project. It's a project that's been there in the company for about 10 years. And it's the sort of project where people will just put some functionality into just because it's easy to put it there. Let's say that you inherit a project which is 10 years old, and then you know that you're only going to work in that project for about 6 to 8 months, and then you're going to give it on to the next team, and you have something relatively hard to build. What are you going to do? A lot of people will just think, oh yeah, well, we need to re-engineer this because it's bad, because whatever. A lot of other people would just say, come on, let's do a quick fix. Let's just build what we have to build and chuck it into the next team. There's no build plan for it at all. So all we have is we make a change in the code. We put that code we commit the code into Bitbucket. And then the build plan just builds it, puts the artifact into Nexus, and that's where we lose control of it. A QA will come, we'll take a look at the code, we'll run manual testing, integration test, all of that. And then if it's approved, then it will go on to the next stage. And if it's not approved, then it will come back to you. You fix the bugs and so on. So you carry on from there. And of course, it's critical to the company, right? Projects that have been there for 10 years. In this case, it's a communications project. It's a communications system. So all it does is it handles all the communications between the company and the client. So we work at a big financial company, which is basically you create an account with us, you put some money, you can start trading. So all the communications between our platform and the final user, like, oh, the market's going down, are sent and, are received into this artifact, and then we send it to the client. So imagine how critical that is. Imagine the market's going down, which has been, I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning of the year or end of the last year, the market was very volatile because of the China thing. So imagine the amount of communications we send there, and imagine if at some point this went down and the clients will not receive that their shares were going down like really, really fast. But this wouldn't be a problem if it worked, right? Because you say, oh, you talk to people and they say, yeah, but it's been there for 10 years, it's been working, it's just fine. It always happens that when things go wrong, they go wrong in the worst possible way, right? You imagine the worst possible scenario, and that's normally what happens. That's I always have this conversation with my girlfriend, and she says, why are you, sometimes she says, like, why all of this? I mean, it can go right, yeah, but it can go really wrong. And that's what we do, right? We're engineers, we should be prepared for the worst case scenario, because that's what's going to happen at the end of the day. So it happened that when we inherited this project, the volume of the messages, a new product was being put in place that will increment the volume of the messages like dramatically. So all of a sudden we got batches of 500 messages, and we got like thousands of these batches that we needed to dispatch. So that caused a lot of outages and everything. So it used to work, but it doesn't work anymore. Or it works, but we have to reset it pretty much like every week, which is really, really bad because cache will get overloaded and everything will be just like, at some point it wouldn't be working. At some point what happened was like the system was doing garbage collections constantly and will not send any more messages. So we actually had to reboot it like a weekly, and at some point it was almost daily. So you would think, come on, you're a big financial company, you are 1,500 employees, we are 680 people, we're 200 developers. Who lets a project like this get into this state, right? So we have this no blaming policy, so we're not looking for people to blame or to fire or anything like that, but one of these days I'll find the person, right? Anyway, moving swiftly on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to structure this in a certain way. I'm going to tell you what's wrong with it or some of the things that are wrong with it. I'm going to tell you how we convince management to actually put some money into a product that sort of works, and it's very critical, into refactoring all of it or rebuilding it. It's sort of between refactoring and rebuilding. I'll explain what we're using to do this. And also I'm going to explain how we are fixing this, what patterns are we using, what approach are we taking, because you know that for a critical product, you cannot really just go rewrite it, do the switch, and then hope for the best, because bugs are going to come up, and since it's very critical, you cannot just say, oh yeah, I'm just going to make the whole change and do the flip. That's not really how it works. So the first thing is, this project being so big and being so old, it's got many, many responsibilities. So one of the things it does is it manages the client preferences. It doesn't manage all of them, right? There's plenty of client preferences that you can have within the platform, but it manages how the client wants to receive the notifications. So let's say that I want to receive price alerts via SMS, and I want to receive major market movements via text, and I want to receive everything else via SMS. So all of these is stored in a database, but then when we start the system, we load everything up in cache, and we have about 150,000 clients. So we have 150,000 clients' preferences all in cache. That takes quite a bit of startup time. Then obviously it sends all the notifications, right? This is what it's meant to do. So this is not necessarily bad. It's not bad at all, but it's one of the main responsibilities. But then it also manages all the mobile device tokens. What does this mean? That means that when a user, let's say that you create an account and you create it with your laptop, yeah? So we store that you have a laptop and that you have an email account, yeah? The next day, you bring your phone out and then you log into the platform with your phone, and that phone has a handle. So we store your handle in the system, and we know that you have that handle. So whenever a notification is going to go through SMS, through a push notification, we have that handle. But let's say that you have had an account with us for the past, I don't know, 6 years, to give a number. You started trading with us in 2010. So on average, how many devices have you had since 2010? Let's say that a user changes the phone every 2 years, roughly, and you change your tablet every 4. So let's say that you have had at least 2 tablets and at least 3 phones. Yeah, that's 5 devices. How many of them do you use? You use 1 phone, 1 tablet, maybe 1 phone, 2 tablets, or maybe 2 phones, 1 tablet. That means that for every user, and I said that we have about 150,000 users, there's at least half of the devices that you're not using. There's a lot more because we actually run the numbers through that. So people mostly use 3 devices, and they have about an average of 8 devices that they ever use for trading, because sometimes you will use your partner's phone, or if you have kids, well, it's not a good idea to use your kid's phone, but probably some people will actually do that, or I don't know, they would just go into a different device and use it once or twice, and that's it. What's going to happen? All of these devices are going to receive these push notifications as well, as long as they have the platform installed. That means we are increasing dramatically the amount of messages that we're sending without any particular reason. So that's something we needed to cut down as well, because also it was sort of a security issue, because let's say that you receive it in a phone that you use twice, and now you lend it to someone else, and that someone else is actually going to see what you're doing with your trading app, which for most of us, you'll have, what, £100 or 100 euros, and you made or lost 10 euros, so it's not really a problem. But for a lot of users, that's a problem. And it's got a lot more responsibilities. I mean, there's plenty of things that this piece of code does just because it's been built incrementally. So we wanted to separate and maybe in little pieces what all of this was about. Another problem, that's that's a representation of what it looks like. So another problem is that the release cycle, right? I mentioned that our build was only that we committed the code into a repository, the Bamboo plan built it, and then the artifact was put into the repo. This is our all release cycle. In my team, we only use this for this project still. So I'm going to give you an idea of how it works. So let's say you want to make a change, right? This arrow represents the time in which you want to make the change. So after it's been released the last time, you make a change. It's a little bug that needs to go to production. It's not critical, but you need to fix it. So you make a little change. Let's say it's 2 lines of code, which is something very simple, right? And then you push the change into the repo, and then you have to wait for 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, because our release cycle is 4 weeks for the test, and then someone in QA will actually grab and tag the snapshot, and then do the QA. So after those 4 weeks, you get 1 and 2 weeks in which no changes are allowed unless it's some sort of critical bug. And then you will have 1 week to fix whatever problems are raised with your changes, right? So let's say you make a change here, and then you go through QA, and they tell you, oh, there's a small bug here. If you have a small bug here, you have to go back here again, and then you will have to wait another 7 weeks to actually get any feedback on the new changes over the new changes you made, which is not ideal. I mean, you will test it yourself, right? But still, oops. But still. So let's say it passes, yeah? And everyone's happy, and yeah, and QA signs it off. So the next week it will go into demo. It will stay in demo for about a week. And then if everything is okay, then it will go to production. Yeah. So let's say there were absolutely no issues with your change. It took you 8 weeks to get a 2-line change into production. I went to a talk in London. I don't remember who he was. It was a workshop. It was not a talk. And one of the things, this guy was talking about continuous integration, and it was a brilliant talk. And he started his talk saying, the problem with our deploys nowadays is you don't think how long does it take you to make a 1-line change and put that into production. And that inspired me to think about this. It's taking us up to 8 weeks to make a 1-line code change and put it into production. That's absolutely ridiculous. That's not sustainable. Do you remember what you coded last week? Not this week, last week? Because I don't. I have to go back to the code and take a look. Do I remember what I did 8 weeks ago? If I go to the code I wrote 8 weeks ago, I will be like, who's the idiot that actually wrote that? It has happened. So we want to completely detach from this, right? As I said, we own our builds, we have our own thing. We want to move into that. So it's really flawed. So there are 3 things that I want to talk about why I consider it's really flawed. There are more, but these are like really, really critical. One thing is maintenance cost, then which are really, really high. Then there's no audio in sending the messages, which is pretty bad. Imagine you receive a message or you don't receive a message, depending on different cases. And the market is very volatile. That's pretty bad. And then there's a certain amount of downtime on deploy. I want to get into that a little bit more in detail. But before I go into that, so all the reasons that I've already given, for any of us developers, I guess most of us are just technical people, you would think, okay, yeah, that's good enough to put your hands into it. Let's make the changes, right? Is there anyone here that is not an IT person and actually it's a manager, of the sort of manager that decides, oh yeah, we're going to build that, we're not going to build that, and only look at the money, not at the technical aspect of it? No? Good, because you're not going to like this. This is how you convince management, yeah? You hit them where it hurts. You hit them with the money. So this is a picture of my team as it was when we started this. It has changed a little bit. So we have an architect, one of these people. We have 3 senior developers. One of those is me. There was no one without her, so whatever. And this tiny guy here is a junior developer. So it has changed a little bit, but this is the people that started all of this. So let's say that a developer can work for about 1 or 2 points a day. Yeah, that makes between 5 and 10 points that you can do a week. This is an average. Some weeks you do more, some weeks you do less, and the estimates are never correct, but more or less. A dev costs the company £500 per day on average. Yeah, an architect will cost a little bit more, the team lead will cost a little bit more, the junior guy will cost a little bit less, but this is more or less an average. So £500 per day per developer. Yeah, that means that in a week you're using, or you can you can deliver between 5 and 10 points, and it's going to cost the company about £2,500. Yeah. At some point, we inherited this in November last year. At some point, we were 3 senior developers working on this full time for about, I don't know, 3-4 months, and then it went down because we fixed a lot of bugs, but we still had a lot of maintenance. So I ran the numbers in March, which is when we stabilized the thing, and we spent, just as a roughly average, £135,000 worth of development only fixing this product, which is about between 280 and 480 points. So if you don't get, I mean, £135,000 sounds like a lot of money, but just to put it in perspective, if you're a startup, with that amount of money, you can hire 2 senior developers and an associate developer for a year. How much code or how many products can 2 senior developers and a middle level developer create in 1 year for a startup? It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous that it takes all of this amount of money just into fixing something. So we presented these numbers to senior management, right? So we have a very heavy process. We have to present a paper to a certain committee, and the committee has to approve it, and this committee only gathers every 3 months, and then some things will be approved and some others will not. We wrote it, we showed the numbers, and it was approved in a week. So that's record turnaround for the company. That was just incredible. They were just like, just go and do it, because it's costing us way too much money. And we could be doing other things. I mean, we are doing all the big data. In my team, we're doing all the big data stuff as well. So we're not doing we were not doing any big data. We were not delivering anything interesting for quite a while. So I'm going to run through all the other things. So no audit sent of messages. There are 2 scenarios. One is that you receive a message and the message is not true and we don't know about it. So let's say you get a message in your phone saying the market's going down, or so we're going to close your position if you don't put any more money because you cannot cover for it. And then the user panics and closes his position. Closes his position means that if he bought something, he sells it. Yeah, that's pretty much all it means. So the user closes his position and then goes to look at the market because he panicked. So you can go into the app in your phone and just sell it. There is a big button that says sell. And the user sold. And turns out that the market was going up. Since we don't have any audit, we don't know whether this client has received the message or not. So we rely on the client telling us, hey, I got this message. I sold because I believe that you're not gonna send me a bad message. And turns out that I'm wasting money. We are a financial company, as I said, and we're heavily regulated. That means that we have to economically compensate the client for the loss that he has had. And also, we'll probably overcompensate him because of the bad advertisement that we'll get out of it. Yeah. So this has happened. Yeah. And there is another possible scenario, which is the client doesn't receive a message and we don't know about it. As I said, with all the market volatility that we've been having at the beginning of the year and end of the last one, imagine if all these clients didn't know that China was down 5%. The Shanghai stock market closed at minus 5 point something percent one day. Imagine we never told them, and they lost 5%. There's clients. We manage all sort of people like us, or like me. I don't judge, which have just the right money to survive the month, and then there's people that got millions. Yeah. So these people, for us, if we lose £10 more or £10 less or 10 euros more or less, it's not going to make me any poorer or any richer, right? But someone that's got millions invested. Let's say that they lose 5%. 5% of a million, it's already a lot of money. It's £50,000. We would have to compensate these people because we didn't, terms and regulations say that we need to inform them, and anything that is in our terms and conditions, we need to comply with. So we needed to put some audit into that. And actually, it got to the point where we actually had to compensate some people because our messages were delayed by a few hours at some point because of the workload. So downtime on deploy. When we inherited this product, we inherited because my manager had worked in the team that maintained it before. So we were so lucky that when the team got disbanded, a team got all the people that were working on them, and we got all their software. So we didn't get any extra hands, but we got a lot of things to do. It's a very interesting project we're working. I mean, it's something very interesting now to be able to refactor it. And actually, it's so good that I'm talking about it. But you can imagine that it was not brilliant. But anyway, we got it, and we didn't have a lot of knowledge. So one day there was a critical bug in production, and it was very easy to fix. So despite we have all of these huge pipeline to deploy, we can overrun it. If there is a critical bug, we can just accelerate all of this and do it on the go. So we needed to do this. So we overrun the process. We fixed the bug. We overrun the process. So we deploy into test. We deploy into UAT. Everything was working fine. We deploy into demo, and then it was working fine. And then we put it in production. So when I put it in production, I was sitting there and waiting for it to restart and monitoring the system and whatnot. And all of a sudden, I see a lot of people coming my way, and I was like, oh, I'm getting popular in the company. I had just started there. I've been there for about 3 months, and it's like, oh, these people are coming. I don't know, the three wise men bringing presents, whatever. But then I look at their faces, and I was just like, oh, no, and that they might not be bearing gifts. So they come to me, and they like, communication's down. And I was like, but yeah, I know, I'm restarting it. And we have like several servers. So, well, we actually have 2 servers. So you think you restart it, restarts one server, then restarts the other. That's not how it works. When you actually restart it, you put down all the machines, you reinstall the software, and then you bring it back up. You know the funny thing? It takes 40 minutes for every machine to restart. So we had an outage in production of communications for 40 minutes because there's so much workload. There's so much, the startup time is so long that everything goes down and you cannot actually control, oh yeah, I'm going to put one server down, I'm going to install the software, I'm going to bring it up, see if it works, and then I'm going to do it with the next one. I learned the lesson, and I had to do it manually afterwards, server by server. The funny thing is that imagine if you have to roll back at some point, yeah? So you put something in production in one machine, you bring it up, wait 40 minutes, that's fine. It seems to work. You put it on the second machine, you bring it up, and then there's some sort of concurrency issue or communication issue between the machine. And then you have to roll back. You have to turn down one server, you have to reinstall, you have to bring it back up, bring down the second server, reinstall, bring it back up. That's 40 minutes, time 4, plus some extra time to give it there. So you lost about 4 to 5 hours of work just because the downtime on deploy is so ridiculously high. So yeah, that makes us a very sad potato. So it's about time to redo it, yeah? So I'm gonna approach this bit into the 3 parts that we decided to take on. So the first one was to re-architecture all of it. I'm gonna show you later a picture of how our flows look like. Then we wanted to reach 0 downtime deploy, or as close to 0 as possible, because between 40 minutes and anything that is close to 0, there's already a huge difference, right? And then we want to detach from the old release cycle. The old release cycle is big, it's bad, and it's very, very ugly. So it's time to put our hands into it, yeah? So the first thing we wanted to do is to re-architecture. I work with a guy here in this company that spoke on the first day, Daniel. He's not here. He must be still sleeping. And he said something really, really wise. And it's like, what do developers do when they gather all together to do some re-architecture? We draw squares, right? That's pretty much what we do. And he said this. He said, we don't get paid unless we draw at least 10 squares per day, right? So we sat together and we actually started drawing squares. This is picture. I mean, you probably cannot say if the image was a bit bigger. You would see that behind the post-its, there are like literally squares that we drew. So we earn our payment that day. So what did we decide to do? So on our first meeting, we said, oh yeah, well, so we're sending SMSs, and then we're sending push notifications, and then we're sending emails, and then we're sending all of this stuff, right? Why don't we create like silly microservices that all they do is you put something into them, and then it just sends an SMS to a number, or it just sends a push notification to a number, or whatever. And we came up with all of these brilliant microservices, architecture, whatever. And then we had to do some work on something else, and then we sat again all together and went over the same problem again, trying to be a bit more precise about it. And then we came with another solution, and then the next time we sat, we came with another solution and another solution. So we decided that what we were going to do is to approach it incrementally, instead of trying to re-architecture all at once. We were gonna slowly make the code a bit better and see where that takes us, rather than doing this. And that's an approach that Martin Fowler actually had a brilliant idea, and I will come to that a little bit when we move in the next couple of slides. So this is a picture of a workflow that I worked in, right? There's a lot of decision making. I don't want to get into all the details in here, because that's well, you really don't need to know, and it would be like a bit boring. But mostly what we do is we get a message here, yeah, which is a generic message. We figure out what sort of message it is, and once we know what message it is, then we go through all the enrichers to actually send an email, well, an internal email through the platform, or any of the push notifications. So we have Google, we support Apple, we support Microsoft. At some point we supported BlackBerry. Which, if you think is stupid, well, sometimes it is. But the other day we got a complaint. This is a little story. We got a complaint from one of the finance team, well, the traders, because we have a trading flow. And he said, oh yeah, a client actually told us that he had received an SMS on his phone, and but he didn't see the transaction happening, so he wanted us to check us. And it was like, oh, can you please send us the whole thing so we can actually look at it at the logs? And they sent us a picture that the user had taken with a Nokia 3310 that had a text, and he had taken a picture with his smartphone, and the guy was actually trading on a 3310. So yeah, we sort of support Microsoft, but on a ridiculous level, right? Fortunately, BlackBerry has announced that they're not making any more phones anymore, so that's good. One less thing to support. So yeah, this is the idea, right? So you can say, come on, let's just check it out, rewrite the whole thing, because it looks really bad, it's really hard. So we use a Spring integration as well, which at some point might have been a good idea, but the one thing that I don't like about Spring integration is that it's really hard to track. So when you're debugging, it just jumps from internal classes into your own classes, and it makes it really hard. So it took me like 2 or 3 hours to actually write that down with pen and paper. That's why I wanted to show it, because yeah, it took some effort. We're still using Spring integration, but we're using it a bit less, so the balance is a lot better from my point of view. So our approach for refurbishment is what Martin Fowler calls the strangled vine pattern. It's amazing what you can do with a bit of paint, right? The strangled vine pattern, I don't know if you ever heard about it. So Martin Fowler says that when he was in New Zealand, traveling around, he went to see these strangled vines, which is just vines that hang from trees. So what these vines do is they wrap around the tree, they strangle the tree, and they thrive in the meantime. So at some point you end up with a rotten core that is dead and completely useless, and all of these really nice vines that have entangled around it. So the idea is, let's just try to, one by one, extract all these flows, break them from a certain point, which is more or less here, and rewrite that bit. Yeah? Fortunately enough, we were very lucky, and while we were talking about this, someone came and said, oh, we need these new flows added, because we're going to send a new sort of notification to people. So we used these as our starting point. So these new flows, we took them, we put them in place into the decision making. So as I said, we get a generic message, and then at this point, this is where we say, oh yeah, this is the sort of message that we're doing. And at this point, we started our new code. So we basically created a new model, and this new model was the first strangle vine that we were going to use. This flow here, it's one of the old flows. So already, this is the decision making, and what we do is instead of checking the message and bringing the user preferences and all the user statistics and all the mobile handles for the user, what we do is we create all the messages no matter what. I mean, instead of making the decision, we put in memory, we create objects for all the types of messages, which is just 4 or 5 different, right? It's an SMS, it's an email, it's a couple of push notifications and whatever. And then from the user, we just filter out the ones that are not. We thought that was a better approach than having to make decision all the time. So we got these objects that we just send into a queue right away, one after the other. It might sound like a bit of an overkill, but if you think about it, all the decision making, and actually we run the numbers, all the decision making will actually take a lot longer to create everything. And at the end of the day, if we have to go to the cache every time to get every handle and go through the flow, it's a lot more costly in time and resources than actually doing that. So this was our approach to Rearchitecture. We've migrated about half of the flow. Most of them are the hardest ones because our architect decided that instead of going for the easy one first, let's just go for the hardest one. And from there on, it should be really straightforward. And it actually was a brilliant idea. I was a bit against it at the beginning, but I have to say that he was quite right about it. So that's for rearchitecturing. We wanted to reach 0 downtime on deploy. So we had 2 approaches, yeah? Or there are 2 basic approaches. The first one is canary release, and the second one is blue-green deployment. For those of you that are not really familiar, canary release means that you deploy into a server, and then check that that server is working. You put a number of users into it. If it works fine, then you start deploying into other servers and so on until all your servers have been migrated. Blue-green deployment means that you have 2 different sets of servers. One is in production, and the other one is one is live, and the other one is dark. And then when you want to deploy something, you deploy into dark, you check that everything is working, and then you do the flip. You put the dark in production, and the one that was live now goes into dark. And then when you want to deploy, you do the same thing again and again. This is still going on, and this is an argument that we're still having. We only have 2 servers, right? We have asked for more servers, and they have said yes, of course, but big company, buying new machines, everything takes ages, right? We, instead of buying small servers, we buy these beefy machines that cost about £100,000, and you can have like 20 different Tomcats running on them with 20 different things. But then again, when we need to buy a new one, we're already so late that we need to allocate other things that were there. So this is an ongoing thing. So we've actually reached some sort of agreement, as in we're doing canary release at the moment. We've checked the code, or we changed the code enough, so now that instead of taking 40 minutes, our average is 58 point something seconds, yeah? So that's quite a change. And it was mostly because every time we went to load the cache at the beginning, we went to the database, we brought the results for one user, we wrote into the cache, and then we went again to the database, right? So that takes, for 150,000 users, you have to make 150,000 calls to the database, which was not very efficient because the database was doing other stuff in the meantime, right? So what we do at the moment is we deploy into one server, we wait for a minute for it to heat up, and then we deploy into the next server, which is not technically canary release because we don't really test it before we deploy into the second server, but it sort of works just fine because we have the demo environment, which is exactly the same. So every 6 months, we flip the demo environment with the production environment. So they have to stay in a very stable way. If at some point the flip goes wrong, then they're going to wake you up at 3 a.m. in the morning because they do this deployment on Friday at 3 a.m. in the morning. So you really don't want that to happen. And the way we are going to approach it when we get the new machines is going to be blue-green. We're going to have a blue server. And then we're gonna have a live and dark, and then we're gonna deploy into dark, and then just turn it around. To reach 0 downtime on deploy, so as I said, we've already optimized the startup quite a bit. It was mostly because of the cache thing. There were other things that were optimized a little bit, but that was the major stuff. And as I said as well, make sure that one server starts before deploying into the other. So we do this little canary once the server is up and we see the logs. We see in the logs that the things that need to restart are there. Then we see that we can restart the other. Otherwise, we just fail and we roll back immediately. And then to detach from the old release cycle, I built the full bamboo plan like on the first day, right? It was like, oh yeah, we're going to refurbish all of this. I'm going to build a bamboo plan. And then I realized we only had 2 machines. And then I was like, oh, but if I deploy into here and it takes so long, then I cannot use it. So the bamboo plan is there, it's written. It took me like a couple of hours to write. And all it does now is when you commit the code, it builds it, it puts the artifact into Nexus, and then it deploys into test, and that's pretty much what it does. But the good thing is already there. So when we get the new machines, we'll just have to reactivate all the other steps, and we'll be able to deploy immediately. So we get out of what we have here. So as I mentioned, this is still work in progress. We've migrated a bunch of flows. These flows we're about halfway through. They are a lot more efficient. They are a lot easier to read, which is when I write code, that's my main goal. I mean, if the person that comes behind me has to be able to read what I did. When I find code that, well, the variables are called I, A, and C, it really annoys me because then I have to figure out what all of this does. So the names of the methods are about this long, but you don't really need to read the code at all. So you just read the method and then you just read what it calls and then you just carry on from there. As I said, we're still waiting for the servers. And finally, we're seeing the first bug in production. So that means, to me, an application is mature when you start seeing bugs. So you can go into, I don't know if any of you have ever worked in a product that you've never seen a bug in. It never happened to me. There's always a little thing, there's always a case that hasn't been thought of, or you cannot test all the positive and all the negative scenarios and so on. So when you really start seeing that an application is lacking stuff is when you put it in production and people do things that you never imagined that could be done. So we're seeing the first bug in production, which are not critical, which is brilliant. That's why I say yeah, despite we see the bugs. It's things that are very easy to fix and are not don't have any real impact on a platform, and that's brilliant. And yeah, there's just one more thing that I want to say. You've been really patient with me, and none of you have seemed to fall asleep, which is brilliant. So this is the last slide, and I just want to leave you with a few things. The first thing is, it was really, really good to have business on your side, on our side. It really helps when you're actually having, so we have a new product owner. We have had 2 or 3 product owners in the last 9 months, 10 months or so. And the fact that we had business on our side actually made the case by itself with the product owner, like, yeah, we're going to deliver some new stuff, but this has been approved, so we're going to work on this, because it's not you that gets waken up at 3 a.m. in the morning if something goes wrong, it's us. So we're going to work on this because, 1, it's good for the company. 2, we really like our sleep. I have a cat. We just adopted a cat, and the cat wakes us up at 5 a.m. So being waken up at 3 and at 5 is really not a thing. And then business says that we can do it, or we have to do it. So the argument is done by itself. I mean, a product owner is very chill, but sometimes he gets a bit like, oh, but there's people asking me to deliver stuff. Anyway, deal with your own stuff. It says stuff here. So if you inherit a project or you create a project, even if it's bad, I mean, when you inherit it, if it's bad, don't just think, oh, I'm going to do this, and then since it's going to go to another person, I'm just going to do it quickly, do it dirty, and then just go away, look the other way. Because when you inherit it, you're really annoyed by what sort of things people have done there. So something, a guy that I used to work with, and now I'm working with again, but he's in another team. I consider him my mentor. He said that when he works on a piece of code, he never leaves it worse than what it took him. So at least he tries to do something either as bad or a bit better, because anything that you can enhance or improve over something that's bad, it's already a win. We are using an incremental approach. As I said, when we got the approval, we tried to do the whole thing at once. Yeah, like, oh yeah, let's create the bamboo plan. So the bamboo plan is sitting there doing nothing. Let's just create all these new microservices. Let's just do. So that was completely unrealistic. So the strangle vine pattern was a really good approach. We read about it randomly somewhere after we had started, and then it was like, oh, this is exactly what we're doing. It's a brilliant idea. So we read a little bit more about it, and it actually made a lot of sense. And the last thing I want to say is that be proud of what you do. I mean, it doesn't matter if you've been working on something for a couple of months. Well, it doesn't matter. Business will care about it, but they don't need to know. If you've been working on something in a couple of months and you realize it's not the right way, just don't be afraid to try and say, look, we need to check this out of the door and we need to start all over again, or we need to revisit a lot of the things that we have done. At the end of the day, most of us are on this because we like it, because we enjoy it, and I want to be proud of what I do. So with that last thought, I want to thank you for coming. And if you have any questions or anything, just please ask. Yep. Yeah, I need that.
So you got rid of all the Q&A steps, which is probably a good thing, but you did tell me that you did put in automated testing.
Yes, we do. Well, we had some automated testing in place, but something we do is for every flow that we have, we actually have an integration. Well, we have an end-to-end test for the flow, and then what we try to have is write more integration tests that when we deploy in the platform, we run that integration test in UAT, and then we run them. We try to run them locally, but then locally it's normally mocks that we test against. So when we don't really rely on those too much, we don't rely on integration test until we actually put it into UAT. But we've written a lot of new tests for the platform, which they were not there, not in place. Anyone else? No? Okay, well, coffee time, I guess. Thank you, guys.